stop behind that and have the conversation explores the art of thinking beyond the obvious. And today I have my special guest, redefining disability, dignity, and what it means to be a fully human, and the author of the book For the Love of Stephen, none other than Dr. Stuart Jones.
Thank you, Daniel. I'm thrilled to be on Abstract Essay because I love this podcast. I love how you dig deeper into the layers of thought, creativity, and human experience. Thank you for having me, sir.
You are most welcome, Dr. Stewart, and thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. Because on Abstract Essay, we celebrate you.
Thank you.
Yes, definitely. And today, let's continue to talk about your book because on Book 101 Review, let we talk about what is the book itself. So let's talk about the writing process of your book. The title For the Love of Stephen, the story of a boy who was never broken. The subtitle carries immense weight. Walk me through the decision to use the phrase never broken.
Yeah, it's really about a concept that of the world's view of those with disabilities versus the family view of those with disabilities. Families with those who are disabled, like my older brother Stephen, we never saw Stephen as broken. We saw him as having some challenges, right? He had challenges intellectually and developmentally, but we never saw him as a broken human being. But unfortunately, some of the medical terminology and some of the clinicians and doctors back in that day, back in the 1950s and 60s, just would describe Stephen as well. They would use crude terms that thankfully we don't use anymore today. Terms like he has a deficit, he's slow, he's mentally retarded, he's deficient. And one doctor said, you're sorry, but your child's broken. He's broken. Well, he's not broken. He simply thinks differently. He operated differently. And as my friend Temple Grandin, who wrote the foreword for my book, said, different, not less, different. And we're all, and Daniel, we got to admit it, we're all different, right? In varying
Yes.
degrees. As human beings, we're all different, some with greater cognitive challenges perhaps than others. But that's why, Daniel, I chose that subtitle. I considered several subtitles, but I chose that one because Steve was not a broken human being. He was a full human being. And sometimes the world tried to break him. People who took advantage of him, who tried to hurt him emotionally and hurt him physically, it never broke his spirit or his resolve to like other people, trust other people, and be kind to other people. That's why Stephen was never broken.
Well said, Dr. Stewart. Stephen was your brother. Writing a memoir about a family member, especially one with the intellectual and developmental disability, is a profound vulnerability. What
Mhm.
gave you the courage to write this story? Was there a moment where you knew you had to share it, or not just as Stephen, but for others?
Yeah, Steve, thank you for asking that. It's a great question. What prompts a writer to begin writing and how do you write? Stephen was tragically killed about 20 years ago. As a human being who fought hard to be seen, he ultimately was not seen, ironically, by a car driver who hit him on a bicycle and killed him. I didn't, but during the grieving process, and we all grieve, even 20 years later, there's no expiration date on grief. I didn't know that I wanted to write the book right away. I didn't. It wasn't until a few years had passed and I began to actually learn more from my parents about the challenges Steve had to be seen, to be included, to be given opportunities like any other person. The more I learned about that, Daniel, the more I really started to admire the way my parents raised him. more and more. And when I learned the stories that they had never shared with me before, that they had kept from me and my other brother, Scott, and sister, Susan, I began to realize this was a remarkable young man. He fought through so many challenges and had so many triumphs. I mean, for example, just very quickly, he was the first of disabled students to be integrated into a public school in Lafayette, Indiana. And that was a challenge, but he eventually graduated with an actual high school diploma, not a participation ribbon, but a real educational diploma. And I began to realize Steve had a resolve and a persistence, as did my parents, to give him the fullest life possible. That's what prompted me. So finally, it took retiring just a couple years ago for me to have literally the dedicated time to sit down and tell his story. And I know I'm biased, but it's a remarkable story. And I also base that on the many, many reviews of the book on Goodreads and Amazon. I'm just overwhelmed by how people have said this story of just a human being that we never knew touched their hearts and their minds so profoundly. So I guess I really did have something to share with the world as I sat down and wrote the book. I didn't know if the world would receive it well or not, but my goodness, it's been well received. So I'm glad, Daniel, I sat down and finally got determined to write.
Yes, and thank you so much for sharing to the world that Dr. Stewart. What is the one memory of Stephen that encapsulates who he has or who he was? The memory you return to when you want someone to understand him as in an instant. Walk us to that moment.
Mhm. There are many moments. It's really hard to find a singular one, but I think the moments that immediately pop into my head as you ask me this question kind of all boil down to how unconditionally loving he was and receiving of individuals. Steve had such a big heart, and he displayed his big heart over and over and over again in the kindness he showed me as a sibling almost 8 years younger than him. He took the time to play with me. We went bowling together, played toys together when we were really young, but he never said no to an opportunity for somebody who wanted to spend time with him because all he wanted was to be included. Now, along with that big heart that he had of just receiving others unconditionally, that also created a vulnerability because those who were more evil, I'll say the word evil, in nature, saw that vulnerability, took advantage of that vulnerability, and would steal money from him, take advantage of him at work or at school. Even his very first wife, yes, Stephen got married, his first wife took full advantage of him in bad ways. So, with that kindness came his inability, though, to discern con artists and people who were trying to use him. So, it was a good thing and a bad thing. But those are the memories I have of Steve, was just a guy that never said no to anybody who wanted to be with him, talk with him, play with him, or need something from him. But the flip side of that could be taking advantage of him. And I've got a couple chapters in the book that deal with that honestly. It's not easy to read, my friends have told me, but it's necessary to have shared those stories too.
Dr. Stewart, you help audiences rethink disability. What is the most persistent misconception about intellectual and developmental disability that you encounter?
Yeah, the most difficult concepts that people have because it's just a lack of education. If you don't know someone with a disability, you don't understand disability, right? So the misnomer that most people carry with them is an intellectually disabled person can't do much. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. It's not a matter of what can't they do. You have to learn what can they do. Steve was capable of much more than anybody gave him credit for, except our family. I mean, again, doctors and some early teachers in his development didn't think he could do much. For example, they didn't think he could ever ride a bicycle, but he did. They didn't think he could ever catch a baseball or dribble a basketball, but he played on the church basketball team the best he could. They didn't think he could learn, but he was quite good at math, and he could read, and he could sort of spell. And they didn't think he had the ability to strategically think, and yet he was a gifted chess player. So that's the misnomer, Daniel, is so many people, we make immediate judgments, unfortunately, as human beings. We make immediate assumptions, and many times those are wrong. We have to, within ourselves, fight through our own first impressions. We have to fight past our own early judgments. We have to see the human being we're talking to, disabled or not, as somebody we want to get to know and understand better. Because the more you understood Stephen, the more you understood he is capable of more than I thought. And I loved when Stephen proved people wrong, and so did our family.
Said Dr. Stewart. Well said indeed. The
Thank you.
medical model of disability focuses on what person cannot do. You spend your life advocating for different lands. What replaces that model when you choose to see dignity and capacity first?
Yeah. When you choose to see dignity, capacity, and when you choose to see a disabled person as fully human, different, not less, you then can begin to realize, how can I include them in my world? How can they be a friend to me? Because they can. How can they be someone potentially that I would hire? That's a big problem we have still in our society, Daniel. They label those with intellectual disabilities or disabilities in general as people who are not hireable. They probably can't work or do much. That is so not true. Steve held a job at the same place for 33 years. And not only did he
Hmm.
hold that job, but as they hired new people, Stephen was the one most of the time who trained them on how to do the job, right? He learned it and he taught others. So, again, getting past those barriers that we put up in our own mind allows us to then see opportunities of what this person can contribute. They can contribute and they want to contribute. Just have to open a door and let them walk in and try.
Well, that's be amazing. Mr. or Dr. Stewart, you said Stephen was never broken. That implies the world often assume brokenness. How did the world try to define Stephen by his limitation? And how do your family and Stephen himself resist that definition?
Yeah. It was an early doctor shortly after my parents began to recognize that he, as a young toddler, 1 year old, 2 year old, that he wasn't developing like a what we call a neurotypical child. He wasn't developing, wasn't quite crawling yet. He wasn't quite rolling over. He wasn't quite uttering words yet, although Stephen became verbal. But when they recognized there was something a little different about Stephen, they took him again to their pediatrician, a wonderful gentleman who actually saved Stephen's life because he was born premature, too early, and had to be in an incubator for 9 weeks. This gentleman took a personal interest in Stephen, but he did help my parents understand that Stephen would be slow. Now, that's the term they used then, slow. They didn't always know how to define it. Today, we define that cognitive challenge as an intellectual disability. Now, my parents, it's kind of interesting, Daniel, they were only 18 years old, very young when they got married. And they had Stephen within just a few months after that marriage. And then they're told your child has some kind of disability. We don't know what it is for sure. We don't know how to define it for sure. We don't know what he'll be able to do. Probably won't be able to do much. And Daniel, not to bore you with history, but my book does jump into history a little bit. What society and even medical science knew back then wasn't a lot, because they would typically take children like Stephen and they put them into institutions. That was the advice given to my parents by another doctor, a different doctor, family doctor, and even by my father's own family. Oh, oh dear, he's retarded. You need to put him in a state home or an institution. Let them take care of him. That's too hard to do. And you can visit him whenever you feel like you want to visit him. That was the diagnosis, that was the prognosis. My parents rejected the prognosis of putting him in an institution. They said no. And I admire them greatly for that. That took courage and love from a couple young kids who were 18, right? They said, no, this is our first child. We're going to love him. We're going to try to understand him. We're going to see what we can do to raise him. That took courage, because, again, many families then put them in institutions. And I'm not judging that. Today, there are severely disabled children that sometimes have to be institutionalized. That's different, right? There's Every child is different, every case and scenario is different. But my parents chose a path to simply say, I, you know, you all think he might be broken, but we don't think he is. And another quick story to illustrate that was kindergarten. My parents enrolled him at age 5 in a typical kindergarten class. Typical meaning all the children were neurotypical children. Steve was neurodivergent, different. Steve couldn't pass kindergarten. And the teacher said, let's try a second year of kindergarten. And Steve tried a second year of kindergarten, and he didn't advance. And the teacher said, let's try a third year of kindergarten. My parents said, no, there has to be another alternative. And they found a place in Lafayette, Indiana. They lived close to Lafayette, Indiana. They found a place where Purdue University, Dr. Gephardt, a pioneer in his day, was evaluating and studying children like Stephen to teach and learn for all of us, how can we reach these children and give them a full life. Plus, my parents discovered a small little learning center in Lafayette called the Wabash Center. Still exists today after all of these years. I visited recently and was just so impressed by how much they've grown. But the Wabash Center was started by a group of parents, not teachers, not clinicians, parents who said there has to be something more for our children than just shoving them in an institution or hiding them away in our house and pretending they don't exist. There has to be more. So Stephen started attending that little place. And eventually, Daniel, there became finally an elementary school in Lafayette that started special education. Special education hadn't really been invented yet in that area, and there weren't many people getting degrees in special education. My parents found a place for him, and that's when the real education began, with experts who could take each individual child and identify how do they learn and how do we reach them so they can live the fullest life possible intellectually and developmentally. And so that's kind of what happened in that regard, Daniel. And it was just revolutionary for its time and in its era. And that's why I admire my parents so much. They took bold pioneering steps that others, just a few others, were trying to take with them.
Well said, Dr. Stewart. You help people deepen empathy. But empathy is a word that gets thrown around a lot without much precision. What do you actually mean by empathy, and how did you teach in a way that changes behavior and not just sentiment?
Mhm. Yeah, empathy is, of course, different than sympathy. But empathy is either having the same experience or trying very hard to put yourself in the situation of another, whether it's the situation of a disabled person or their family, right? We didn't find a lot of empathy in our day with Stephen. Not in the school, we did not. Not in the community, we did not. In church, we found empathy and we found compassion. And that's where people need to kind of, if you can't find the empathy, if you feel like you can't relate to a person with a disability, and I've been told by some that they are afraid of people with disabilities. They're afraid they're going to say something wrong, do something wrong, or won't know how to react if the child, reacts differently than they're used to. Well, then, if you can't feel the empathy or this, and they don't want sympathy, then at least get to the compassionate side of your human nature. We all have a compassionate side. Whether or not we tap into it or not is an individual decision. But tapping into the compassionate side and then seeing this individual as worth something. I think what frustrates me the most is people who can't empathize or who are not compassionate and would rather just discard, ignore. Or even today, there are individuals who still want to segregate those with disabilities as though, we don't want to see them. They're unpleasant. We don't understand them. Can we put them to the margins of society so we don't have to deal with them? The answer is no, you cannot. No, they are fully human and they are here. And our job is to reach them, not trying to make them reach us. We're not trying to fix them because they're not broken. We need to fix ourselves in how we see them and the compassion we would have, and how we can try to break down our own prejudices and biases and bigotries and relate to them on a different level. That's on us, and we as humans have to do that. And that's a tall order, I realize, but I address it in the book, and hopefully I give some good ideas in there as well.
Definitely, Dr. Stewart. You've been having a series of conversations with entrepreneurs and experts about building wealth scaling business, creating organizational structure, and optimizing taxes. If Stephen were in the room with us, what do you think he'd say about of it? What question would he ask of these successful, driven people?
Yeah, I think, well, Stephen was a very curious person, and that helped him to learn. Stephen was. He wanted to understand how things worked. If Stephen was in a room and was asking questions, he wouldn't be afraid to ask questions. But sometimes he was very silent too. But when it came to anything that was being made or fixed or built, he literally would step up and get close and watch. He had a wonderful inquisitive style about wanting to learn, which again many people do. Some people don't, whether they're neurodivergent or neurotypical. They don't care to learn. Steve cared to learn. So he would ask questions, basic questions, of course. He had an IQ that I realized was low on the silly scales that we make. And he was forever a child in his mind, but an inquisitive child and a smart child for forever being 12 years old. So he would often ask questions, especially in church, Daniel, when it came to understanding, the Bible or God or Christianity, or when it came to understanding anything. Back in that day, we would fix our own cars. So he would stand under the hood with my father and other brother and try to figure out how do these things go together and what do they do. And again, that just helped him grow, I guess, as an individual. Inquisitive, yes. Wanting to learn, yes. And that's why I say it again today. That's what makes many of these individuals special. Even if they are nonverbal and they can't vocalize their desire to learn, they want to learn. Show them, teach them. They're very interested in how the world and things work.
Well said, Dr. Stewart. And before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people, because my abstract essay is already in sixth season, abstract poetry in third season, and mob book 101 review in sixth season too, a comedy 101 fourth season, and mob food 101 in sixth season as well. Geography 101, love letters, a movie 101, and music 101 are in fifth season, Science 101, Sex 101, and it's a fourth season. Trivia 101, Motivation 101, Spiritual Awakening, Entrepreneurship 101, Law 101, Mental Health 101, Coaching 101, and of course, my Bible Verses 101 are my baby podcasts. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcast. So, Dr. Seward, if you had to distill the message for the love of Stephen into one sentence, one truth that you hope readers carry with them long after they finish the book, what would that sentence be?
Human life is precious. All human life is precious. And every individual has infinite worth. Whether you recognize it or not, I challenge you to recognize that every person is fully human and has infinite worth. Stephen's story will show you that.
Certainly. So, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Dr. Stewart. So, can you please invite our listeners to support your book itself?
You can. My book is available on Amazon and Goodreads and Barnes and Noble. It's on 50 online platforms. For the Love of Stephen: The Story of a Boy Who Was Never Broken, by me, Dr. Stuart Jones. I also invite you to visit my website because people are enjoying that and the many things I have there, including links to your podcast, Daniel. And so you want to go to my website at www.authorstuartjones.com. And Stuart is spelled Stuart. But yeah, visit my website, drop me a line, invite me to an event, buy the book. I promise it will touch your heart more than you ever thought it would. I promise.
Yes, and Dr. Stewart, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. So, Dr. Stewart, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Daniel.
Welcome, people. See you soon.